Bournemouth Studios, England. 1957. A man in a lime green suit walked onto a closed film set, pulled a pistol from his waistband, and pointed it at a 27-year-old Scottish actor who was mid-scene on a couch with Lana Turner. The actor didn't flinch. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it until the gun dropped, and knocked him out cold with a single right hook. The man on the floor was Johnny Stompanato, bodyguard to Mickey Cohen, one of the most dangerous mob bosses in Los Angeles. The actor was Sean Connery. He wasn't James Bond yet. But after that punch, he didn't need to be. Scotland Yard escorted Stompanato off the lot. He was deported for violating England's gun laws. And the story, whispered through every casting office, every studio bar, every producer's back room in town, became Hollywood's favorite piece of underground mythology. Don't mess with the Scotsman. 5 years later, that Scotsman would become the biggest movie star on the planet. And for 2 decades, no producer, no matter how powerful, how furious, how personally betrayed, would ever fire him. This is the story of why. The first domino was a number, £6,000. That's what Ian Productions paid Sean Connery to play James Bond in Dr. No. The year was 1962. Connery was 31, muscular, rough-edged, and, according to Ian Fleming, entirely wrong for the part. Fleming wanted someone refined. Someone like David Niven. When he saw Connery's screen test, he reportedly called him an overgrown stuntman who lacked the elegance to play a British secret agent. But Cubby Broccoli saw something different. Or more accurately, his wife Dana did. She'd watched Connery in a minor Irish fantasy film called Darby Ogle and the Little People and told Cubby over dinner, "That's your Bond." Cubby listened. He later said he wanted a ballsy guy. Someone where you could put a veneer of sophistication over a tough Scottish hide and get something Fleming's novels never quite captured on the page. Dr. No opened and the world shifted. Audiences didn't want a polished aristocrat sipping martinis. They wanted danger with a grin. Connery gave them both. The film grossed over $60 million on a budget barely touching $1 million. Fleming reversed his opinion so completely that he wrote a Scottish ancestry into Bond's backstory as tribute. But here's where the first crack appeared. Connery looked at his £6,000 paycheck, then looked at the box office receipts, and the math didn't work. It never would. What the crew on Dr. No didn't know, but Cubby Broccoli absolutely did, was that the Stompanato story had already traveled across the Atlantic. Broccoli's offices sat on South Audley Street in Mayfair, and in those corridors, everyone knew exactly who they'd hired. Not just a leading man. A former bodybuilder with a black belt in karate who had disarmed a mob enforcer at point-blank range and dropped him with one punch. In every negotiation that followed, that knowledge sat in the room like a loaded gun no one mentioned but everyone respected. From Russia with Love quadrupled Connery's fee. Goldfinger quadrupled it again. But the franchise was a machine now, printing money at a rate that made Connery's raises look like loose change. By 1965, James Bond merchandise alone was generating hundreds of millions. Lunchboxes, toy cars, cologne, board games, Bond was everywhere. And the man who made Bond breathe on screen was getting a fraction of a fraction. Connery started talking. Not to the press, not yet, but on set, to the crew, to anyone who would listen. He told a journalist in 1966 something that would follow him for the rest of his career. "What I'm really tired of is a lot of fat slob producers living off the back of lean actors." He didn't name names. He didn't have to. Everyone knew who the fat slob producers were. Broccoli heard the quote. Saltzman heard it too. Neither man confronted Connery directly. Because here's the thing about the Bond franchise in 1966. It wasn't just big. It was the single most profitable film series in the history of cinema. And Sean Connery was its engine. Replacing him wasn't a creative decision. It was a financial impossibility. The man could say whatever he wanted, insult whoever he pleased, and the studio would absorb it, because the alternative was losing Bond. Then came Japan. July 27, 1966. Connery and his wife Diane Salento landed at Tokyo's Haneda Airport for the location shoot of You Only Live Twice. What waited for them was chaos on a scale either had experienced. Hundreds of journalists and photographers, virtually anyone in Tokyo who could hold a camera, descended on the production. The mob started at the airport and never stopped. At the hastily arranged press conference in the Tokyo Hilton, Connery appeared exhausted, no toupee, wearing shower sandals, baggy trousers, and a blue shirt open to reveal his chest. A reporter who'd waited 6 hours in the lobby looked at him and asked, "Is this how James Bond dresses?" Connery's jaw tightened. "I'm not James Bond," he said. "I'm Sean Connery. And I like to dress comfortably." For 6 weeks, the siege continued. Paparazzi hid behind fences. They hung from trees near the outdoor sets. They positioned themselves on rooftops with telephoto lenses. Director Louis Gilbert could barely shoot a street scene. The moment his hidden camera started rolling, fans would swarm Connery and ruin the take. And then it got worse. Japanese photographers followed Connery into a restroom and allegedly photographed him on the toilet. The image ran in a Tokyo newspaper the next morning. Connery read the paper at breakfast. He folded it, set it down, and didn't speak for the rest of the meal. Broccoli hired 30 additional private security guards. It didn't help. Some of the guards started taking photos of Connery themselves. The Japanese press refused to call him Sean. Every headline, every interview, every caption read, "James Bond." It was as though the man inside the character had been erased entirely. During one interview, Connery, exhausted after 14 hours of shooting, made a comment that was mistranslated as an insult to Japanese women. The backlash was immediate. What he actually said didn't matter. By then, the damage was already compounding. Halfway through the Japan shoot, Connery told Broccoli he was done. Not done for the day. Done with Bond. Permanently. Now here's where most people think the story goes one way. Connery quits, they find a replacement, everyone moves on. But that's not what happened. What happened was stranger, slower, and far more poisonous. Because Broccoli didn't accept the resignation. He couldn't. You Only Live Twice was mid-production with a budget approaching $10 million, the equivalent of $50 million in today's money. The volcano set alone at Pinewood Studios had cost over $1 million to build. 700 tons of structural steel. 200 miles of tubular scaffolding. You could see it from 3 miles away. Walking away from that wasn't an option for anyone. So Connery finished the film. But something had changed in his eyes. Watch You Only Live Twice carefully and you can see it. The quips land a half-beat late. The charm is mechanical. The physicality is there but the joy is gone. Critics noticed. Audiences felt it even if they couldn't name it. The film grossed $111 million worldwide, but for the first time in franchise history, the numbers went down from the previous installment. Thunderball had made $140 million. The machine was slowing, and its engine was running on fumes. After principal photography wrapped in London, Connery made his public declaration. He would never play James Bond again. The word never would come back to haunt him, and eventually title a film. But in that moment, he meant it with every cell in his body. Broccoli and Saltzman scrambled. They screen-tested unknowns, established actors, anyone with a square jaw and a British accent. They landed on George Lazenby, an Australian model with no acting experience who got the part partly because he accidentally punched a wrestler during his screen test and impressed Broccoli with his aggression. The irony was almost too perfect. They were looking for the next Connery, and they cast someone based on whether he could throw a punch. On Her Majesty's Secret Service was a critical success but a commercial disappointment. Lazenby, advised by his agent that the spy genre was dying, walked away after one film. Broccoli was now 0 for 2 on Bond replacements, and the franchise was bleeding momentum. He did the only thing he could, he called Connery. The negotiation that followed rewrote the rules of Hollywood deal-making. Connery demanded, and received, $1.25 million, a percentage of profits, casting approval, director approval, and script approval. In 1971 money, this was unprecedented. But Connery added one more condition that had nothing to do with money. Broccoli's partner Harry Saltzman was not allowed on set. Connery told the production team that if Saltzman showed his face during filming of Diamonds Are Forever, he would walk. Saltzman didn't show. There's a moment. And this is the kind of thing you only hear about years later from someone who was holding a C-stand in the corner, where a gaffer on the Diamonds Are Forever set asked an assistant director why they were paying one actor more than the entire crew combined. The AD looked at him, lit a cigarette and said, "Because he's the only person alive who can save this franchise, and he knows it." Connery took his entire fee from Diamonds Are Forever and donated it to the Scottish International Education Trust, a foundation he created to help disadvantaged Scots attend university. He didn't keep a penny of Bond money. That detail tells you everything about where his head was. The role was a prison, and the salary was compensation for time served. Diamonds Are Forever performed well enough to steady the ship, and Roger Moore stepped in for the next 7 films. The franchise stabilized. Connery moved on to projects with Hitchcock, Sidney Lumet, John Huston, directors who saw him as an actor, not a product. He gave performances in The Man Who Would Be King, Robin and Marion, and The Offense that proved Fleming had been spectacularly wrong about the overgrown stuntman. But the Bond saga wasn't finished with Connery. It never is. In the late 1970s, producer Kevin McClory, who held separate legal rights to the Thunderball storyline through a court settlement dating back to the early 60s, approached Connery about starring in an independent Bond film. A remake of Thunderball, outside the Ian umbrella, without Broccoli's involvement. Connery said yes, and his reasons had less to do with money than with revenge. When asked by Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show to name the greatest Bond villain, Connery didn't hesitate. He didn't say Blofeld. He didn't say Goldfinger. He looked straight into the camera and said, "Cubby Broccoli." The audience laughed. Somewhere in Beverly Hills, Cubby Broccoli did not. Never Say Never Again went into production in September 1982, with Connery back in the tuxedo at age 52. The shoot was a disaster from day one. Producer Jack Schwartzman, an entertainment lawyer married to Talia Shire, Francis Ford Coppola's sister, clashed with Connery almost immediately. The script was rewritten constantly, sometimes overnight. British TV writers Dick Clement and Ian La Frenais were brought in to salvage pages that were literally being shot the next morning. Steven Seagal, hired as the film's martial arts instructor, broke Connery's wrist during a training session. Connery didn't even know it was broken until a decade later when he mentioned it on Leno's show. Connery's assessment of the production was blunt. "It was a bloody Mickey Mouse operation." He later added, with the kind of controlled fury that only a Scotsman can deliver at low volume. Schwartzman was totally incompetent. A real ass. In the middle of everything, he moved to the Bahamas with an unlisted number. It was like working in a toilet. I should have killed him. And yet, and this is the part that still baffles people who study the Bond franchise, nobody fired Connery. Not from Never Say Never Again. Not from any film he ever made. He could call the producer a toilet. He could publicly name the franchise's creator as his greatest villain. He could demand that partners be banned from their own sets. And nothing happened. The contracts held. The cameras kept rolling. The checks cleared. If stories like this deserve to be told, stories Hollywood has spent decades trying to bury, subscribe. Because this is just one of them. Why? The answer goes back to a film set in Borehamwood, 1957. To a lime green suit and a pistol and a single right hook that echoed through every boardroom, every negotiation, every power struggle for 26 years. The Stompanato punch didn't just make Connery a legend before Bond, it made him untouchable during Bond. Because in Hollywood, talent gets you hired. Box office gets you paid. But reputation, the kind of reputation that comes from knocking out a gangster in front of a film crew, That gets you something money can't buy, fear. And fear, in the movie business, is the closest thing to permanent job security. Broccoli never forgot what Connery was capable of. Not physically, though that was part of it, but temperamentally. This was a man who did not bluff. When he said he would walk, he walked. When he said he would never play Bond again, he meant it, until the terms made it impossible to refuse. When he said Saltzman couldn't come to set, Saltzman didn't come to set. Connery's word was backed by something Hollywood respects far more than contracts: consequence. Never Say Never Again was released in October 1983, the same year as Roger Moore's Octopussy. Broccoli tried to sabotage it by re-releasing the early Connery Bond films simultaneously. His plan was to remind audiences what a young, slim Connery looked like next to the 52-year-old version. Both films performed well at the box office. The franchise survived. The rivalry became cinema folklore. And Connery walked away from Bond for the final time. He won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor 4 years later, playing an Irish street cop in The Untouchables. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Connery's most celebrated non-Bond role was as a tough, principled man who refused to back down from gangsters. Art imitating life imitating art, spiraling back to a film set in 1957 where a young Scotsman settled a dispute with his fists and changed the power dynamics of an entire franchise. Connery and Broccoli didn't speak for years after the Never Say Never Again debacle. But time, as it does, softened things. When Broccoli's health declined in the mid-90s, Connery called him. They spoke briefly. Whatever was said stayed between the two men. When Broccoli died on June 27, 1996, Connery released a statement. My previous differences with Cubby Broccoli were well known, but I recently took the opportunity to make my peace with him. He did not attend the memorial service. Timothy Dalton was the only Bond actor who did. Sean Connery retired from acting in 2006, telling an interviewer he'd grown disillusioned with the idiots now making films in Hollywood. He'd been offered Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, reportedly $30 million plus 15% of worldwide gross, which would have earned him around $450 million. He turned it down because he didn't understand the script. He also passed on Dumbledore in Harry Potter and the Architect in The Matrix. He didn't need them. He didn't need anyone. He never had. He died on October 31, 2020, in Nassau, the Bahamas. He was 90 years old. Years later, Kim Basinger, his co-star in Never Say Never Again, was asked what it was like to work with Connery on that chaotic, underfunded, constantly rewritten production. She thought about it for a moment, and then said, "If Sean Connery hadn't taken over, the film wouldn't have had any chance at all. He carried the whole thing past the finish line on sheer will. That was the man. That was always the man."